Of many waters with 6 races living together.
Globespan is a Guyanese dialogue moving towards the realization of one nation in one Guyana. It's a platform that offers an all-inclusive discussion, with the pros, the cons, the ones that is taken aside, and the ones that stand in the middle. Globespan believes agreeing and disagreeing are part of the nation's building. Globespan believes that every Guyanese voice is part of the nation's building. As we span the globe for voices from the diasporas and those living home, we stand on our commitment that we are all Guyanese working towards one nation in one Guyana.
Coffee and Dr. Jagan, Bobby, she gave us our great sons. Rohan Kanhai, Coffee and Dr. Jagan.
As the world turns on its axis bringing changes, we as Guyanese must adopt to those changes for a better Guyana for all. Globespan stands on its axis with its belief that one nation, one Guyana, one destiny must include voices from all corners of Guyana.
Me Guyana, land of many waters with 6 races living together.
Welcome to Globespan once again. This evening, we do not have with us our regular moderator. However, we will approach the program from the standpoint of a round table. We are this evening discussing the whole question of the Westminster System and its relevance to Guyana as a plural society, the Westminster Parliamentary System. For the benefit of the audience, probably we ought to explore what the Westminster System is all about, what a plural society is all about, applying it to Guyana specifically, and having done that, then to explore the relevance of the system to Guyana. In studio this evening, we have the regular guests in the person of Ravi Del and Ramharak Betaram. We have a new guest in the person of Mr. Hicks, Andrew Hicks, who is a lecturer at the University of Ghana in the Department of Sociology. And yours truly, Vincent Alexander, who is doing the intro here for you. So as I said, I think the way to go for us is to, first of all, explore the whole concept of the Westminster System, explore the idea of a plural society, and then, with those concepts clear, we look at the relevance of that Westminster System to Guyana as a plural society. And I'm going to ask Ravi to have the first go at it.
Well, Westminster System, I think all of us should know a bit about this because we inherited it from the British. They ruled us after 1814, and they insisted that they would keep us as a colony until we learned the rudiments of this system to govern ourselves. So we were being, tutored by them for our own good, because we didn't know better initially. Be as it may, some of the fundamental aspects of that system evolved within their experience in Britain. So by the time they began to introduce democracy, England had conquered Scotland and Wales and Ireland. So while individuals would still define themselves by those terms, by and large, they were fairly homogeneous in how they saw the nation. Nationalism had served its purpose to give them a united identity, and ruling their colonies, ruling their empire, gave even disaffected Irish and Scots an incentive to be seen as British, because, for example, in Guyana, 90% of our overseers were from Scotland, poor as they were, the lower classes, but yet they were overseers. They were over all of us, overseeing us, overseers. So in terms of governance, they introduced democracy, and they elected gradually commoners to the House of Commons, the ordinary people. They then had men initially, then women. So you had this franchise. At that point, it became a universal franchise where all British men and women over 21 would elect members to the House of Commons, they call it. They had a peculiar institution from their history, a second house called the House of Lords, where the old nobility that used to run England would sit and, in a sense, oversee the Commons. That went on for quite a while. So for our purposes in Guyana, the Westminster system basically is an elected system that sends representatives to their parliament, the House of Commons, and then there's the House of Lords, that's hereditary, and also they have some who are then selected by governments. Of great importance to us is the rationale for their mode of electing their representatives. They broke England into constituencies. So they would talk about representing the interests of those people in those constituencies. And within each constituency, they would elect a member from whoever different parties that would put up their candidates. So a feature of the British system is to have constituencies, and they would elect representatives from these constituencies. And the rationale for that was that they wanted strong government, because the method of counting the votes was first past the post. So in England, and I want to leave us here, the representatives who would represent them in the House of Commons were elected from constituencies where the person agglomerating the greatest number of votes, the majority of the votes, would go on to Parliament. And similarly, the party that overall acquired the most seats based on these constituencies would then form the government. That, in a nutshell, to me, is some of the primary elements of parliamentary Westminster government.
Thank you, Ravi. Andrew, do you want to add to that? Comment on that?
Well, thank you very much, Vincent, and colleagues of this panel. It's a pleasure for me to join tonight's conversation and to contribute to such an important discourse, which in my view seeks to interrogate the sociology of Guyana in the context of Guyanese political relations and to recognize the historical facts and influences in terms of our current political structure and the manifestations of the political relations that evolve therein and therefrom. I do recognize Ravi has quite aptly explained what manifests as the plurality system, the system of democracy, the context of the first past the post system of governance, and how we have arrived at that. In the context of Guyana, I add that while we, in our democracy, historically have had the first past the post principles, that we, some years after our independence, moved to the system of formally adopting the system of proportional representation, which in fact removed the multi-constituency arrangement and placed Guyana in the context of one single constituency. And while that may have been at one point an accepted experiment in the context of Guyana's democracy, we have also seen some of the challenges that the PR system has engendered. And so we have now moved to a democracy that is sort of a hybrid arrangement in which we have an overarching proportional representation system, but one that is entwined with a constituency system leveled at the context of our regional system. And we talk about the election of our parliamentarians in the context of a hybrid arrangement that synthesizes proportional representation and the first past the post arrangement in the context of our regional representatives. And so I think that is the nature and context of our democratic electoral practices at the moment. And I think it is worthy of some interrogation about the benefits and whether or not we need to explore making further changes that will be more relevant to Guyana's development trajectory moving forward.
Thank you, Andrew.
Vincent, before we proceed, it's rather disconcerting for Andrew to be flitting in and out. Is that something Devin can control?
Yeah, we're fixing it now.
All right, let's hope we get that improved on. And in the meanwhile, we go on to Peter.
Well, I don't want to repeat, what was said. I think, there's just a couple of things I want to throw in, and I want to kind of shift the focus to the other two words that we're using in our topic, the whole notion of a plural society, and its application or the application of a parliamentary system. So I think most people, in simple terms, when we say parliamentary system, you're kind of looking, if you're looking at the British system, you have the Prime Minister, right? In the case in Guyana, the Prime Minister doesn't have as much power as the President, so there's a distinction there. And I think one of the overarching structural mechanism built into a parliamentary system is, as opposed to a presidential system, is the whole notion of the executive fusing power with the legislative branch. In other words, if you have a majority party in parliament, then you pretty much control the executive and the and the legislative branch, unlike the United States, right, where you have that separation of power. And certainly, as was mentioned here, this was a system that was given to us by the colonial power. They are obviously impositions. You know, we fluctuated from times where we have basically one house to times where we have two houses, right, in that legislative structure. But I think for us, when we talk about the parliamentary system, inevitably, the focus is on the whole notion of who controls parliament and therefore who controls the executive branch. And I think that is where, for us in Ghana, that is where the issue lies, right? You know, we can make improvisations to the current system. In some ways, it has been perversed. With this whole notion of, let's say, for instance, party paramountcy. But there are other ways, mechanisms that you can include to make this a more functional system. We can talk about, you know, taking power away from the national government and placing that into the hands of local government and so on. So all of those things, you know, you can do to make it a more perfect union, so to speak. But to come back to what I said before about, you know, this being this kind of system existing in a plural society, the Europeans have worked out their issues, right? Since the collapse of the Roman Empire, they've settled their issues. So that was a natural process. Again, using England as an example where the parliamentary system developed, right, over years. So that worked well for them. So we have a society that is, as we say, plural. So therefore, the challenge for us, as I said before, is that how do we make that system more responsive? How do we make it more acceptable to everyone? And I think that has been the challenge for us. But I'm not suggesting we throw the system out. I'm saying we can work within the system we have because, you know, you can't throw out everything that you were accustomed to for so many years since independence. So we're stuck with this system.
This is an explanation.
And when we talk about making that applicable in a plural society, one of the focus that people have actually latched on to is this whole notion of power sharing, especially in society where you have different communities. How do you you know, mesh the parliamentary system? You have opposing political parties, but at the same time, mesh the representation or ensure that everyone gets accepted into that system and are part of that system. Thus, as we have seen in our situation, we've had to throw in this whole discussion about power sharing within this whole notion of a plural society and a parliamentary system. And I think that is where we are at this stage. But that's a different discussion we can have, and maybe later on we can continue with that. So I will leave it at that.
Thank you. If I'm to throw in my 2 bits in the question, I think that when we talk about the Westminster system, in many regards, we're talking about a system that is majoritarian, in the sense that, yes, we have constituencies, and the parliament is made up of the various elected persons from the constituencies. And the relationship between the parliament and the government or the executive is that the party which acquires the majority of seats is normally called upon to form the government. But let me hasten to say that in the circumstance where a particular party does not control the majority of seats, that system provides for parties to coalesce, and through coalescing to form a government made up of more than one party, but essentially observing the majoritarian rule, because those parties would, having come together, represent a majority of the seats in the parliament. So the whole notion of a majority rule is germane to the Westminster system. But when we talk of majority rule in that context, we're not talking about a representative system where the party that has the majority of votes is the party that takes the reign. We're talking with the party that has the majority of seats. And that is important because in the Westminster system, the constituencies are not necessarily even in terms of the numbers. And so you can have situations in the Westminster system where a party in terms of the absolute votes may in fact be a minority party, but at the same time, having won the majority of seats is the party in government. And I think that we have some stark examples of that. I think right now, if I'm not mistaken, in Barbados, the ruling party won all of the seats. But if one were to look at the proportion of votes, they may have somewhere in the vicinity of 70% of the votes. And the party with 30% would not have won a single seat because they did not win a single constituency. And so that the parliament is not necessarily representative of the people from the standpoint of the minorities, minority party being represented, because the basis is constituencies as opposed to the absolute number of seats the party acquires. One could be ridiculous to say, for example, that a particular party could lose each and every constituency by one vote and end up with no seats. And the party that won each and every constituency by one vote can have all of the seats. And you can have the kind of situation where a party that has 49%, of the votes, or even more, or even majority of the votes, can find itself not having a seat, as was the case once in Trinidad, where one of the parties with 30-something% of the votes did not, in fact, have a seat. And so we can juxtapose that to the PR system, which is not the system that is associated with the Westminster system as a norm, because the PR system provides for two things. One, parties to get seats in proportion to the number of votes that they acquire. And it also provides, in the case of Guyana, for a party to be in government once it has acquired a plurality. That is, a party need not acquire a majority of votes. But if in a contest with a number of parties, a particular party comes out with the highest number of votes, though it may be less than the majority, it may in fact be called upon to make up the government. In fact, not may be called upon, but is entitled to constitute the government, as opposed to the Westminster system, where very often a judgment call is made when parties do not individually have 50%. A judgment call is made asking parties to coalesce so that they could collectively have 50%. And that is something we need to understand, because that's exactly what happened in the case of Guyana in 1964, when the People's Progressive Party had the majority of, had the largest block of votes. But the combination of the People's National Congress and the UF had the majority of votes. And what the governor did at that time was to call upon those two parties, once they agreed to coalesce and to occupy the seat of government. So that when we talk about Guyana in the context of Westminster system, I think there's always a contention or an argument about whether in fact we are Westminster system or not. Andrew introduced the idea of us being hybrid, but insofar as we still have a situation where there's majoritarian rule, one may well contend that that is essential element of the Westminster system, which keeps us within the definitional understanding of what the Westminster system is, notwithstanding the fact that this would seem a little contradictory, that we cater for the plurality, but in a circumstance where the party that acquires government is looked upon as the one that has the largest number of votes, although they may not have the majority as would have occurred in Guyana in 2011. So that in some regards we have inherited the Westminster system, but in many regards, particularly after the 1980 Constitution, many elements of that system are no longer present, and the contention is, do we in fact fit into the Westminster system or not? But to a very large extent, the academics still seem to contend that Guyana inherited and still is a member of the family that has the Westminster system. The question that arises, therefore, is with that system, what's the correlation between the parliamentary system and the society itself? Because as Ravi said, in most instances where you have the Westminster system, they're homogeneous societies. And so this apparent distortion between the number of votes and the number of seats doesn't have the same kind of, doesn't raise the same kind of question that is raised in societies that are not homogeneous, societies that are plural societies. And therefore, it's critical for us to contextualize this Westminster system in the case of Guyana, which is not a homogeneous society. And so it would be useful for us now to examine the whole question of the plural society, and I'll ask Ravi to take the lead in that as well.
Well, I want to pick up what Vincent just explained, but to emphasize one aspect of it, which is that this whole thrust, this whole urge to make our political system more or most applicable to our society is not new. That's the first thing we must say. It is not new. And as Vincent said, from the very beginning, as we struggled for independence from Britain, the matter came up because in the 1961 elections, at that time, it was a constituency system, first past the post, like in England and in all the other colonies, excepting Cyprus, I believe. And yet, so the PPP was able to win overwhelmingly. And as Mr. Burnham pointed out to the British overlords at that time, it just wasn't fair, because even though the PPP got, I believe, 24 out of the 35 seats, their percentage of votes did not match. So Mr. Burnham explicitly raised the matter of the correlation between votes, which implies the people, and the representative in Parliament. And as the Bible says, lo and behold, the British changed the system. Duncan Sands changed the system, and PR was imposed in the view of Dr. Jagan. It was imposed in Guyana, and we went to the polls in 1964. I'm not going to get into the background of all of this in terms of the Cold War and what else may be playing out. I want to look purely at our political situation in choosing representation within a plural society. Because, as the British explained, the rationale for imposing PR, they pointed out that PR does, in fact, go to the essence of plural societies. That if a society is plural, meaning there are groups within that society that see their interest as differing, then PR gives them an opportunity, each of these groups, to be able to agglomerate their votes and be represented, especially as the British did in Guyana, for an overall list PR, meaning the whole country, as I think Andrew said, is one constituency, and you can agglomerate votes. So let us really hone in on this, that the British explanation, with a straight face, whatever else they may have sought to do, they said they want to make a system that is more representative of Guyana's plural society. So here we are from the word go. In 1964, we are making changes, or we are having changes. We have requested changes, and changes were made to the form of governance and to the method of selecting that government. That's the first thing I would like to say. Now, as Vincent also alluded to, that the PNC did not get the majority of the votes in that election. The PPP got the plurality, the largest bloc. But what the British had explained and what happened is that you have the option of coalescing with another party to form that majority. And that majority, and that other party, by definition, would be one that whose supporters did not see their interests as common with yours, or else they would have voted for you. So again, it's a mechanism, the British says, to bring together people from a plural society. And again, lo and behold, because these were like biblical things coming from on high, the UF coalesced with the PNC to form a government, right? And in my estimation, and I want to editorialize a bit here, this was, I think, something very, very revolutionary, because like I said, the British was changing 200 years of their own history from 1832 when they gave the franchise, to change it for us in Guyana. We were almost unique. Like I said, I may be subject to correction that Cyprus was the only other one, and Cyprus had some problems in '63, I believe. So the thing is that we got a special dispensation in 1964 to address our unique plural nature of our society. But again, and I don't want this discussion to evolve into all conjectures and, like the old scholastics argue about how many angels can dance on the head of a pin. For in real terms, Mr. Burnham decided by 1967 that he does not want to go into a coalition in the future. He does not want these other interests in the society to agglomerate with his party's interests and so form a government that has a broad spectrum of interests under its umbrella. Mr. Burnham decided that he will go it on his own. So by 1968 elections, the PNC went alone on the PR system. And again, I will not, at this juncture, devolve into the legerdemain that Mr. Burnham performed, but he did come out with a smashing majority. So, and I'll leave it at that. The point is, I want to emphasize that the effort to match the system of governance, to change the parliamentary system, to change the Westminster system, and to also use the electoral system to do so is not new. It was changed, it was done, and if we can have a counterfactual. It is very possible, in my estimation, that if Mr. Burnham had continued with electoral policy, Guyana's politics would have been much more moderated, somewhere along the lines of Eric over in Trinidad, because you were agglomerating a wider cross-section of your citizens' interests. I leave it at that for now.
Andrew, would you comment here? Plurality, plural society? Your mic might be muted, Andrew. You're not
yes,
hearing
it is muted. Andrew, on mute.
Unmute your mic.
Yeah.
Yeah, just click it once, Mr. Hicks.
I didn't get that.
Mr. Hicks,
click it once, not twice.
Yeah, just click it once to unmute.
It's mute again.
It's muted, Andrew. Unmute.
One click.
There you go.
Right,
Yes.
good. You're there. Go on. Go ahead.
Yes. I do recognize and want to acknowledge indeed that Guyana is indeed a plural society. We are made up of different ethnic groups, regardless of what proportion they exist. And they have their own peculiar interests, their identities, their cultures, and their values. And it is important to recognize that the politics of the society should be organized and mobilized in such a way that it allows for the integrative development of the various ethnic groups. What I think historically we have seen in Guyana is that while we have made some accomplishments with the tweaking of our political system over the years, historically, we have had a number of political conflicts, fallouts, and dissatisfaction that have inhibited Guyana's developmental progress. And that is so because our political parties are essentially organized around our ethnic identities. All across Guyana, there is the acceptance that whilst the two major political parties in the main proclaim that they are multi-ethnic parties, at the broader level of the society, there is open acceptance that these parties are aligned according to the ethnic population, and in fact, one being of East Indian patrimony and the other of African or Black patrimony. And so, that being as it is, has led to a number of dissatisfactions. And what we have seen, despite the efforts of Forbes Burnham, despite the contestations of Dr. Jagan and the subsequent leaders of the PPP and those in the PNC, that has brought about changes in 1980 and again in 2001. What we've seen is that our electoral arrangements does not bring about the ideal satisfaction and the level of cooperation between these two ethnic groups. And so the question that arises is whether or not the current electoral system and the parliamentary system enables the bringing together of the different ethnic groups and to forge the whole process of national development. My answer to this is that while there's been some achievement, it is requisite at this time that we take stock of the challenges that prevail. For example, I think historically, post-independence onwards, neither of the two major political parties have generally accepted the results of the elections. In the 28 years of the Burnham-Hoyt PNC, the results were rejected by the PPP. In the 23 years of the PPP, the results have been rejected and contested by the PNC. And we have seen in 2015, whilst there was a change in government bringing together what David Granger termed as the Grand Coalition, and I put a question mark on that, there was a rejection of that outcome by the leadership of the PPP. And again, in 2020, we've had a similar rejection scenario. And so what that points out to us is that we have a political arrangement that is not engendering the unity of the nation. And so perhaps the time has come for us to look at re-engaging and modifying the system that will probably introduce a new formula in terms of our governance structure. For me, I think what would be more relevant in terms of a new experiment is the adoption of a consociational arrangement for electing our parliamentary representatives. Because why I say this, even in the context of the present majoritarian system, in which there is the argument that the elected representatives are those who participate in parliament, we have a situation at hand in which the present executive, the governing PPP, refuses to engage with the leadership of the opposition, the elected representatives of the people. And that in itself is a contestation for further divide and destruction. Their argument is that they would prefer to engage with a wider body of citizens. That flies in the face of a parliamentary democracy, and more particular in the context of a Westminster democracy within the boundaries of our pluralism. And so I think the time has come for us to explore modifying our arrangements to bring about some moderation and probably the adoption of a more consociational system. And I think linked to that, at some point in time, we should also not only explore the whole issue of power sharing, but also the issue of fiscal decentralization, so that you have an integrative political structure that embraces a development trajectory for the people and by the people.
Thank you, Andrew. Andrew has, in some regards, started to look at the question of the applicability of the Westminster system to our society. Beto, you may want to go back to the question of the plural society and then take it forward.
Yeah, well, I think what has been raised here today so far is the question. Well, we've talked about some of the imperfections, right, in the plural society. I don't know if you guys can hear me. I'm getting a lot of
Yeah,
static.
yeah.
We are hearing you.
All right. So the logical question here is, if we're seeing the imperfections are there, then how do we fix the problem? How do we make it workable? In 1992, I had an article published in Caribbean Studies on the same very topic, consociational democracy, a democratic option for Guyana. The problem is, when you look at a power sharing arrangement, the first problem is, I don't know where, that sort of a system exists. So my concern is, are you going to create more of a problem than looking for solutions? Now, granted, if we're saying the problem can be tweaked, there are a number of things, for instance, that I think I would support. For instance, this whole notion of having, constituency-based politics, the way we had before. I think that's something that will make the system more responsive, because you're putting power in the hands of local people. The whole notion of being able to form coalition, not the kind of coalition of convenience we saw, with APNU and AFC. I'm talking about being able to form coalition before. And the reason I'm saying that is because this whole notion of power sharing came about because Africans in Guyana felt that because Indians are in the majority, when you have elections, they will have that upper hand. I believe it was Chetty Jagan in his book said that in 1967, for the first time, the Indian population peaked over the 50%, right? And that continued because prior to that, you had better, sanitary conditions and so on. People were, we had ways to address malaria. You had high birth rate and so on. And that continued until the 1980s, when the Indian population was about almost 53. So there was a legitimate concern there, right, from Africans, that you're living in a society where, though plural, one group has the edge. But the point I'm trying to make here is a couple of things. One is, if we're going to throw this system out, then do we have a model? And I think, a discussion with people like Henry Jeffrey, they point to this whole model in Northern Ireland. The problem is, when you look at that system and any kind of consociational, which is a big word for power sharing, you run the risk of, creating a government where, first to begin, there is really no strong opposition to question what you're doing. And then you're also running the risk of having, gridlock in government. And we've seen that if we can use that model in Northern Ireland as the best model there is, then that has been one of the issue. The other problem there is, we don't have a long tradition of conflict that has been so intense that groups have to come together again, as in the case of Ireland. And I think the other issue there is that you do have an overriding power, right? A power broker that work to kind of keep those two groups in Northern Ireland together. So when there's gridlock, who comes in? Well, it's the British government that plays that role. So our situation is different. We don't have a society today where you have one group being a majority. This is why I'm saying coalition politics would be a way to go, but being allowed to form coalition before. The Amerindians are about maybe 10+%. The Indian population is about probably 40% or less. So we don't have a group in this plural society that can dominate power in an election. So you do have to be able to, either you work with coalition or you should be able to work with other groups. So therefore you can be more inclusive. Again, it is an imperfect system, right? I think there's room for being more inclusive. That's something that we can work towards. And yes, we don't have a truly multiracial political party, but those things are very rare, very rare in what we define as plural societies, and it's difficult to try to imagine where these groups can work together. The best way to address this is to really manage the problem. So this, if you want to call it consociational arrangement, doesn't break down and doesn't get out of hand, where the groups go back and become very, very competitive. And I would just add one more thing, when it comes to Guyana, I think there are many opportunities here where you can kind of work towards creating a much more inclusive system within this, Westminster Parliamentary System that we have. So I would throw the question out again. If we throw this system out, and maybe Vincent might want to talk about this, then what do we have, and what do we replace this with?
Thank you. My disposition, first of all, is to determine whether there's a problem, and to contend that in many regards the plurality of the society poses a problem. Our society has evolved through the coming of different peoples who would have had different belief systems, probably different value systems, generally speaking, culturally different. And worse than that's a natural state in many regards. But worse than that, I think that plurality was also engineered. I think that the colonizers, in their own interests, engineered plurality in the sense that they recognized the natural plurality and they exploited that natural plurality by pitting ethnic groups against each other in various ways. From the very inception. So, like I said, naturally we have the problem, but in addition to that natural problem, the colonizers engineered and sought to engender that plurality rather than to do things to create a more homogeneous and cohesive society. And this is to me where the problem has its origin. I think that the political forces in Guyana themselves, at the point of the commencement of the struggle for liberation and independence, recognized that problem and did try to deal with that problem, so that when the People's Progressive Party was formed, history tells us that there was a concerted effort. This is not a coincidence of ideology or anything like that, but there was a concerted effort to look for a leader of the Indo-Guyanese and a leader of the Afro-Guyanese, the two major groups, to bring them together so that as we went forward, we could have these two groups working under the leadership of a multi-ethnic leadership, so to speak, and therefore working together to work towards independence and beyond independence. So I'm saying that the fact that they consciously sought to bring together the Afro-Guyanese and the Indo-Guyanese in one party under Indo and Afro leadership was itself a recognition of the problem, a recognition that we had a plural society. Now, unfortunately, that did not work, and I would contend that the vision that took place, fraction of the party, was not necessarily a function of ethnicity, and that it was necessarily in the first instance a function of ideology. At the level of the leadership, that division, in my view, is a function of ideology. But that natural state that I referred to earlier, of a society which was not homogeneous, then out of the coincidence of fracturing that was ideological, but reflected in the Indian leader going in one direction, the African leader going in another direction, led to the society lining up behind the ethnic groups. And that was almost understandable, because that's the reason why they came together in the first instance, to stop that kind of lining up. So they naturally sought to line up, though that was not necessarily the basis or the reason for the split in the party. The groups themselves, bottom up, kind of lined up. And I would venture to say that the political leaders then in turn exploited that natural state in pursuit of office and political power. And so here is a manifestation of the plurality impacting the way in which society evolved and the way in which society was developing, and in fact, lending to a problem that, if not resolved, would mean society would not have the smooth kind of cohesive development that is required if it's really going to be able to tackle problems other than the ethnic problem. And I'd like to go further to say that whilst very often we tend to focus on the Afro-Guyanese and Indo-Guyanese, and my good friend Henry Jeffrey talks about the bi-communal situation, I don't think that we should ever ignore the fact that even as the Indo-Guyanese and Afro-Guyanese lined up behind leadership, kit and kin, that the same emergence was taking place in the Amerindian Guyanese community. That we had the emergent situation where they too were, in a sense, being mobilized by and lining up behind somebody of the same ethnic group. So it's not just a question of the Indo and Afro. I think the Amerindians were also, in some regards, into that mode, with the smaller groups, the Chinese and the Portuguese, not being that easily identified with that situation. Suffice to say that one may contend that there was the Portuguese and the Amerindians coalesced, because the TUF, in a sense, found itself representing largely the Amerindians, whose numbers were even greater than the Portuguese. So I'm saying there is a problem. And the question is, has our parliamentary system worked? Has it worked? Now, we know what happened prior to 1964, and we know what the call was at that time, and we know why we changed from the system of constituencies to a PR system. And in many regards, those who call for the change, whilst not being specific about the change addressing the ethnic problem, they weren't specific about that. But if one checks the stats, then the change in some regards was intended, in fact, to address the ethnic problem. It was intended to provide for a situation where you wouldn't have ethnic dominance, because the way in which our constituencies were constituted. In a Westminster system, constituencies can be manipulated in a manner to favor one or the other party. And in the case of Ghana, not only was that manipulation possible, but the way in which we populate the country provided for natural constituencies of ethnic groups. And so, though we talk about a constituency system, to a very large extent, that constituency system reflected the division and the heterogeneous nature of the society. So in some regards, PR was intended, could have addressed that problem, because with no group necessarily being a majority, PR meant that groups had to find a way to get crossover votes if they were in fact going to become dominant, or to do what happened in 1964, two parties which essentially represented different blocs came together. The PNC, which represented to a large extent the Afro-Guyanese, and the TUF, which represented to a large extent the Amerindians and the Portuguese, came together. But then there again is the problem that they have come together, two of them, and a large bloc is kind of left out. So it's not a complete solution in our circumstance to the problem. So how do we, in fact, in the context of the ongoing division, which is now reflected in the political system by virtue of the way parties have evolved, how do we overcome this visual, clear division and this attempt to go after power from the standpoint of one's ethnic group, as opposed to going after power on the basis of ideology, on the basis of ideas, bearing in mind that there's a claim that they're going after power on the basis of ideology. But the way the elections throw up the results and the way the parties conduct themselves during elections clearly suggests that it is ethnicity that drives them far more than ideology, and the outcome does not lend to any kind of cohesion. Therefore, for me, the problem persists, and the question is, how do we address that persistent problem? There are some ideas I have in that regard, but since we do this by rounds, I would then cede to Ravi to see what his views are in terms of addressing the problem. He may not even agree with my contention in terms of the external problem.
Well, I think you've said a mouthful there, Vincent, and there's a lot to unpack. But again, I want to emphasize this point, that at various times, there have been attempts continuously in our history. This is not a theoretical problem of matching our political system to our plural society. Mr. Burnham, with a straight face, after he kicked the UF to the curb, introduced a new constitution, right? He introduced a new constitution. Even before that, with the Declaration of Sophia, he talked about a new nature of the party, of a paramount party, being the party being over the government, because it describes the existential reality that is the party people who will be running the government, and therefore, in that sense, is a party that sets, whatever policies there are. Unless, in fact, he was saying this is a more honest approach. We saw that playing out in terms of doling out, where the Ministry of National Mobilization was fused with one of the PNC Office of the General Secretary or some such thing, a very cumbersome name, about 10 letters. The point I want to make is that Mr. Burnham, and let's not even get into quibbling, tried one method of bringing the society together on an ideological front, taking a risk against the Americans. He introduced cooperative socialism. and he introduced it in a manner where he saw the need for us as a people, all Guyanese, to be disciplined. We were indisciplined in his mind. So this was a very carefully thought through program whereby he formed institutions, the Ghana National Service, the Ghana, what do you call it, the People's Militia. You had the GDF. You had in Isha, you had the YSM. Vincent would know about that. You had, you know, the WRSM and all of that. So each aspect of our society was being disciplined, where even the civil servants had to go and perform labor and what have you. The point I'm making is that we went through all of that to address it. It didn't work. And we have to ask ourselves why that didn't work. We have to ask ourselves why that didn't work. And I think we gloss over that, you know, and for various reasons. And we ought not to. This is not academic. We're not here, as I said, discussing how many angels will dance on the head of a pin. Coming back to the later years where we had to reverse gear, because as Marx said, man makes their history, but not in circumstances of their making. So Mr. Hoyt had to decouple to a great extent a lot of those, if we may call it innovations, and sign on to the neoliberal paradigm, right? And you talked about the PPP then coming in and operating within that. But that did not stop this effort to accommodate our plural society. Dr. Jagan had talked when he was going to be campaigning for election 1992. Beto and I had gone back to Guyana to participate. And Dr. Jagan emphasized that no, there was a term he used, no class or no ethnic group or no strata will be left behind, right? But he formed something called the civic to show that unity. So while we may quibble, and more than quibble, we may disagree vehemently as to whether the civic was representative of what he spoke about and whether he had backtracked on some of what he promised. The effort was there, the acknowledgement was there. Similarly, when later Robert Corbyn was leader of the PNC. Whatever we may say about Robert, he saw the need for a PNC that was going to be acceptable to a wider spectrum of Guyanese. Yeah, I don't think he used the older Bush's phrase of a kinder, gentler PNC, but that is what he attempted to create. And we saw he stepped aside. Mr. Granger was put there. Brigadier Granger was put there. And this name itself was dropped. You had APNU going into. So these are all attempts because it was a wider conglomeration. People forget that ROAR was represented by Everett Franklin in Parliament that formed APNU at that junction. We made it clear we were not invited to do that, but he was there on ROAR's behalf. So there was an attempt to form an overarching, wider coalition, which was more representative of the people. The effort was there. In my estimation, and this is the key thing that everyone keeps avoiding, including Vincent, that right now, because of what transpired before, there has been a complete change of the Guyanese demographic, and Mr. Hicks, as a sociologist, should appreciate that. Unlike when we pointed out in 1992 that there was an African ethnic security dilemma, that if he went along with the so-called democratic rules, he was going to be locked out forever. Beto and myself put that out. We put that out, and nobody mentions that we saw the dilemma of the black man in Guyana and the need for a change. But at this juncture, let us also now accept that that dilemma is now over. We are a nation of minorities. And in a nation of minorities, as Vincent said, maybe in another circumstance, but just now he said it, that therefore you have to reach across your so-called natural group, reach across the divide and agglomerate votes. And in doing so, you ipso facto bringing others from other groups. So you're talking of addressing the plural nature of our society. And Mr. Granger did that in 2015. So it is not a matter of conjecture or just counting angels. This occurred in our Guyana in 2015, where Mr. Granger, as the head of APNU, coalesced with a party under Mr. Ramjatan. I think, I'm not sure where Raphael was at that juncture, but he coalesced. He was known to have at least 11% of the Indian votes, and they won an election. They won an election, and they got into government. So when we talk of consociationalism as a methodology of addressing the ethnic dilemma in terms of groups' interest being thing, we forget that there's another form of power sharing, consociationalism. Let us accept this, that there are great dangers here. Consociationalism has about 5 elements, and the major elements is this pre-coalition, but it has minority veto over matters that affect their interest. They have a veto over it. And we have seen, for example, in the rule where the minority does have a veto over the selection of our Chief Justice. You would say, man, how come these two parties can't do it? Because there's a minority veto. And it's called the problem of immobilism. You're immobilized if you can't come to an agreement. So consociationalism is not the panacea that we talked about. But I want to conclude by saying what I've been talking about, and I don't get any response. Another form of power sharing is called centripetalism. That if you have to go out and accommodate the other, you in a sense are creating a centripetal effect. You are moderating your rhetoric. You are bringing people inside. So here is a major problem we are facing in Guyana. So is the PNC, which do what Mr. Granger did, they can either get Indian votes by coalescing, or they can go into Indian communities, use people like Mahipal and others to get Indian votes. Would we say that they are Harakati recruiting indentured? Like some are saying that those who go into black communities to recruit votes are slave catchers? I mean, this does a great injustice to where we are. We have a way right now, an opportunity in Guyana for us to use centripetal power sharing. Go out and moderate your program to accommodate the interests of the other groups, accommodate the Amerindians, accommodate Indians, accommodate Africans. And maybe we can create this new beginning in Guyana, because people will see themselves represented in there. And not necessarily by faces or token faces. We have to get towards policies and programs. So I'll conclude by saying now that this is not theoretical. We are here and we need the here and now. And I think we got to get off this whole point about saying, well, you meet in Parliament, that's where you meet the representative of Africans. But there's nothing should stop you from going into African villages. You got me? There's nothing that stops the PNC from going into Indian villages or Amerindian villages. You should be doing that. Let them see that you, let them touch you, feel you. I always come back to my own village of Iflat. Where I walk in my village of Iflat, we have an African section. And as I walk through, people will call off, Ravi, Ravi. They know you. They can talk to you. They can feel you, touch you, hold you. Enough said. I think I've spoken as long as Vincent normally does.
Andrew, take it from there. And please unmute your mic. Unmute your mic now. Yes, go ahead.
No, it's still muted.
It's muted
It's still
again.
muted, Mr. Hicks.
Still muted. Still muted.
There you
Yeah.
go.
Unmute. Good. Go ahead. And it's muted again.
Just one time,
click
Mr.
and let
Hicks.
it go. One click, Andrew, and let it go. It's muted.
There you
Right?
go. Yes.
Go ahead.
Yes, yes, I do hear Ravi on the issue of the alternative form, centripetal power sharing, as against constitutional power sharing. I can appreciate his argument, but I also think that to suggest that because consociational power sharing in its tried form has emphasized on minority veto, that does not mean that if we are seeking to bring about a system that is appropriate and relevant to Guyana's context, that we need to emphasize on the issue of minority veto, and that we can move away from that and we can bring newer principles into the decision-making forum. I think when we look at the constitutional reform process post 1997, all the way up to 2001, that the nation has a better example of power sharing, the devolution, engagement, and ultimately engendering the level of national cooperation through dialogue and integration at the level of the parliament. When you look at the ways the structure of the Constitutional Reform Commission, it gives a voice to the minority and a voice that had power in the decision-making process. And that dialogue in itself resonated into an integrative arrangement in which we saw at the level of the parliament, the two major, the political parties, inclusive of the two major political parties, agreeing to the kind of constitutional reordering that has given Guyana much of the peace that we have. But notwithstanding that, I think we have to recognize that in the context of our existing plurality, that while there isn't open, violent confrontations, that there is high levels of dissatisfaction across the various ethnic groups. There's lots of suspicion about each other. And while we seem to be mingling, we are not mixing sufficiently. And therefore, it is necessary that we look at the arrangement. I think oftentimes there is the fear that the consociational structure will engender ethnic hostility, but it really has the capacity to ease ethnic tension. And I think for me, what stands out is the power sharing methodology that flow out of the post-97 constitutional reform process that saw a level of maturity and participation.
There seemed to be a connectivity problem with Andrew. I will therefore ask Beto to comment at this time while he tries to get back in.
Well, you know, if we can put the forms of government, right, on a continuum, let's say on the one hand, you look at the American system where you had, you know, a constitution called the Articles of Confederation. You had a confederation of states that exists, right? They, and without getting into all the minute details about that, there were a number of issues there. So you can't have communities existing or parts of a state existing, you know, with their own sort of independence or semi-independence, right? And on the other extreme, you can have a situation where you may have situation where in some societies, plural societies, where conflicts can be escalated to an extent where it's difficult to establish a state, right, that can exist where people can actually interact with each other. So in the middle of those two framework, I'm trying to make the argument here that despite the imperfections we have a parliamentary system, but I'm suggesting that we can correct those imperfections or attempt to correct them with some of those consociational arrangements we're talking about, right? And to kind of simplify this, you know, we have written about this over the years, and it comes back to repeating some of those, you know, mechanisms which we believe can address some of those imperfections. And we talk about the issue with the coalition, the whole notion of constituency politics. I'm going to throw in a couple of others, which we have discussed before. Any system of any government that controls political power should look towards creating a sort of a multicultural policy in terms of addressing, you know, issues that come up. Now, Canada has that, right? You know, here in the school district, you know, where I reside, we had the superintendent adopt a superintendent and the board adopt a multicultural policy. Basically, what that means is, yes, you're promoting this whole notion of, you know, one Guyana or one district or whatever, but you recognize the diversity that you have in the community. So therefore, when you're hiring, you want to be conscious of the fact that you want to be inclusive. So I'm going to throw in this whole notion of inclusivity as another mechanism that we can use. We have talked about this whole notion of caucusing, right? Where you have different communities, regardless of who is occupying the position of power. You can have this sort of a caucusing, like the United States. You have a Black caucus, you have a Hispanic caucus that advises the Democratic Party. They take positions and they try to get the party to adopt to those positions or address specific issues that they have, right? We also talk about this whole notion, another way of addressing imperfections, this whole notion of having ethnic impact statements, you know, where you can have, if the question is about allocation of government contracts, well, you can address that or try to address it. So ethnic impact statements will allow you, you know, to look at those programs, who's benefiting and who's not benefiting, and then come back to the drawing table with the different communities and try to address that. That also entails a certain level. And again, this is another proposal we have made in terms of specific proposal to address imperfections, which is the notion of having some kind of affirmative action. We're having a discussion here primarily about Africans and Indians, but we have the indigenous people. Affirmative action policies will certainly benefit them in certain levels, right? In certain things that you know, certain issues that they have to deal with. So I think when it comes to the imperfections, yes, if we look towards a purely defined form in terms of, you know, this whole notion of consociation or power sharing, as defined by people like Haran, the Dutch political scientists who came up with this, we're in a sense going to, I think, create problems that we can't deal with, and it's going to lead to additional pressure on the current state that we have. So in summary, I'm saying we can exist in a parliamentary, with the parliamentary system in a plural society, but consciously moving towards addressing those imperfections by adopting some of those mechanisms, that I mentioned.
Thank you. Andrew, I would have wanted to come back to you, having lost some time. You haven't lost some time, but we're just 5 minutes away from the end of the program. And Ravi will tell you that's far less than the amount of time I would normally speak for. So I'm going to wrap it up. And I think that basically we have found ourselves in some regards at two different ends of the pole between myself and Ravi, with probably yourself and Beto coming down the center. Whilst it is true that in 2011, 2015, there was a manifestation that parties could in fact cross the divide and get votes, we must never lose sight of the fact that that crossing of the divide itself took on an ethnic dimension. The AFC came and what they got essentially was in the votes. And we never really saw a complete organic opposition in the sense of the APNU and the AFC. So to me, the ethnic problem still, to a very large extent, prevail. And so, bearing in mind what happened in 2011 and 2015, bearing in mind that we haven't mentioned that there were attempts between Borum and Chetty, two attempts, I think, in somewhere in the 70s, somewhere around 77 and 85, in fact, to find a solution. That also should be borne in mind. I think that to get to where we want to get to, there needs to be what may be an interim arrangement. And I, in some regard, would consider power sharing an interim arrangement where, first of all, we have to do what has not been done by the politicians, is to accept and admit that there is a problem to be solved. I think that's probably the biggest part of our problem, this denial of the problem. And so we have to get to the point where there's acceptance of the problem, and where we work together with the understanding that there are no losers. Because I think one of the problems we have is that there's a feeling that there could be losers in all of this. And the political forces tend to focus on that fact that they may be losers. What we haven't accepted also is that there's another dynamic other than ethnicity, which is not unrelated to ethnicity in Guyana's context, and that's the dynamic of class. And that what has essentially happened in Guyana, you have the emergence of economic class that is also very much identified with an ethnic group. And so to some extent, one may find that that class uses ethnicity in its interests, though its fundamental interest is class. And given the way in which the ethnic groups are organized, they're able to manipulate the mass under the class. So there's really a need to identify that there is a problem. To me, the solving has to do with being able to retreat. And to me, retreating could be evident in some period of power sharing that allows for refashioning things, that allows for building trust, that allows for this fear of losing being overcome, and that to do that at the central level, I think that given the way in which we are geographically or demography, if you were to have a true possibility of decentralization, where both from the standpoint of governance and the standpoint of resources, communities are able to do much more for themselves and not point a finger at someone else, then we may well create the environment where we can eventually get back to a system where this whole question of good governance prevails. Because what Beto has really pointed to is good governance. And one of our big problems is that in pursuit of power and control, we really don't observe good governance. So the whole question of inclusion, the whole question of transparency, all these elements of good governance, which can provide for a kind of equality, is absent. And therefore, we need a period for building good governance, and a period in which we also give recognition to the fact that the ethnic groups have different problems. And Ravi talked earlier on about the security dilemma. They have different problems. And that in that period, we seek to identify and to provide for the resolution of those different problems, so we can transition out of a society where diversity means division into society where diversity means respect, mutuality, and recognition, and commonality insofar as the nation is concerned. I think we have reached what may be called the witching hour, and so I have no choice but to bring the discourse to the end. Suffice to say, I think we have to find some way in this conversation to explore the two end poles, where I am and where Ravi is, to get to something that is acceptable, not only at the intellectual level, but at the level of the people. Because at the end of the day, much of what our politics is, whether we like it or not, is still driven by the people's perceptions of where we're at and what we're doing. And the challenge is, how do we give the kind of leadership to the people to break down those perceptions? So thank you very much to our viewers for watching. I think that this conversation is obviously incomplete, but it's obviously thrown the questions that we should be looking at as we continue the conversation. Thank you.